Hello and welcome everyone to tonight's webinar on Defeat Diabetes, the low carb program for reversing type 2 diabetes. This webinar is brought to you by Capital Health Network and Dietitian Nicole Moore from Defeat Diabetes. First, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on. I acknowledge and respect their enduring culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I pay my respects to the elders past and present. Also acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending tonight's event. Their land was and has never been ceded. I'm Dr. Leonie Harcourt, a GP Education Advisor at Capital Health Network. Also with me tonight is Nicole Moore from Defeat Diabetes and Kanal Mohiti, the Events Lead at Capital Health Network. So on to housekeeping. All participants have been muted. Please type in any questions you may have into the Q&A section of your Zoom window, not the chat box. We'll have a question and answer session after Nicole has finished her presentation, and the presentation itself will be uploaded to the Capital Health Network YouTube page, and you're welcome to share it with your networks. With respect to CPD, so please feel free to report 1.5 hours of educational activities to your CPD home. We will also send you a certificate of attendance. And so we're lucky to have our first and only presenter tonight. We're very honoured to have Nicole Moore. So Nicole is an accredited practicing dietitian, founder of the Low Carb Keto Health, and a dietitian for Defeat Diabetes Low Carb Program. Defeat Diabetes is a digital program developed by doctors and dietitians to help those living with type 2 diabetes adopt a low carb approach, improve blood glucose, and achieve type 2 diabetes remission. So a very big and worthy goal. So I'll stop talking now and hand over to Nicole, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me tonight. And as I was introduced nicely there, I am an accredited dietitian and have been the Defeat Diabetes dietitian since they started, and also the founder of Low Carb Keto Health, where we do low carb programs for people for chronic disease and particularly diabetes. So today I'm actually going to treat you all as my patients and show you how I guess I educate people on low carb and the importance of it, and how it can be something that can really improve their health outcomes, particularly when it comes to diabetes and also weight management. I think it's really powerful to be able to teach people these principles in practice. And so I'm hoping by today, if I teach you as if you were my patients, you will be able to get some good strategies that you might be able to use practically in your own practices. If you're very versed in this low carb space, then hopefully you'll get lots of takeaway messages of how you'll teach others. If you're new to this space, then maybe I am teaching you some principles about low carb and how it can impact and help people, and what that actually all means practically, because at the end of the day, we really need to understand how to live this life. And Defeat Diabetes online program is just a great resource for people to be able to go to and really learn it from the ground up and understand it, and learn how to live it, but also understand why. And I think that's important. So I hope you take a few things away today that might be useful in your own practice, or useful in your own life as well. So what I'm going to do today, you are my patients. I'm going to take you through, I guess, why low carb diets are effective, and how they can help improve or put type 2 diabetes into remission, and also help with obesity as well. I'm going to go through what we mean by low carb, and then I'm going to teach people how they can organise their pantry and their fridge, some smart shopping, low carb strategies. We'll go through some cooking essentials. I think it's really important in practice. People sort of don't really understand how it is that they can cook for themselves and their family. Take them through some simple label reading tips to look at low carb, and also how alcohol can fit in. We'll do some eating out so that people can see it's doable even when they're not at home, and what happens when there are some slip-ups as well. So lesson 1 is explaining to you as the patient, and what I do on a daily basis is why low carbohydrate diets are effective and how they can impact type 2 diabetes, how they can improve it, and also how low carb diets can also be helpful for people who've really struggled with their weight. I'll go through and explain the 4 macronutrients and their function in your body, the role of carbohydrate, discuss how carbs will affect your glucose levels if you have pre or type 2 diabetes, and highlight the importance of managing carbohydrate intake for diabetes management. So there are 4 macronutrients as my patient that you eat, and I want you to understand them. There are carbohydrates, there are proteins, there are healthy fats, and there are fiber. And so there are 4 types of carbohydrate that potentially you are eating in your diet at the moment. Those 4 types of carbohydrates include added sugars. So this is if you're eating or drinking sugary drinks, eating the fun stuff as, the cake and the chocolate or the biscuits, and these foods are going to impact how much sugar goes into your blood. There are also natural sugars in the diet, and these come from honey and fruit in its all forms, milk and yogurt. And then there's the starchy carbohydrate that also release and impact our sugar levels. The breads and cereals that we eat, and the grains, the rice or the crackers, the below ground vegetables as well, like your potatoes and your sweet potatoes. And the 4th carbohydrate food that you are potentially eating is fiber. And these are predominantly from our above ground green leafy veggies and our nuts. Now, what is the function of carbohydrate? And ideally in your body, it is releasing as glucose or as a sugar for your body. And this is really important for energy production, or ATP as we call it. So your body is producing energy out of carbohydrates for your functioning on an everyday basis, for your brain and for your heart. So now let's look at the function of carbohydrates. They do release energy, but what's really interesting is they're actually not technically essential. Your body can actually make sugar from non-carbohydrate substrates. So it's actually really clever. It can take protein and it can take fat, and through a process called gluconeogenesis, your liver can actually make the sugar that you need. And our bodies only need a really small amount of sugar in the blood, or glucose in the blood. So even if you ate no carbohydrates all day, your body would actually be able to kick in and produce some sugar. And you'd be able to read that if you were doing a finger prick test. You would actually see you still have glucose in your blood enough to keep your brain functioning. So technically, carbohydrates are non-essential, and you will produce sugar without them. So now let's look at protein. And protein is really anything that comes from an animal. So it's your meat and your chicken and your fish and your eggs and your dairy. There are vegetable proteins that are things like nuts and beans and tofu and soy products, tempeh, and these are ideally quite important if you're vegetarian or vegan. Now, protein is actually essential, and there are 9 essential amino acids that we do need to consume, and we have to consume them in our diet. So protein is really an essential macronutrient, and it's really important to build our muscles and our bone strength, and muscles are really big glucose burners. So if we really got good muscle mass, then we're going to burn a lot of sugar in our blood. And I do find a lot of people do not have a good amount of protein in their diet, and they have poor muscle mass. And in fact, we do see a lot of people with sarcopenia. They have low muscle mass, but they're holding a lot of body weight. So protein is really essential, and muscles are really essential. Then we've got our macronutrients, which is our fat. And there are 3 types of fat you'll be consuming in your diet. You've got your monounsaturated fats, and that's what you're using in your olive oil and consuming in your avocado, nuts, and seeds. You've got your polyunsaturated fats. That's your oily fish like your salmon, your chia and flax seeds that you might be adding to your yogurt, and walnuts. And then we've got the saturated fats, and that's things like butter or ghee, coconut oil, cream, and full fat dairy foods. And again, fats are actually essential like protein. You would have heard of essential fatty acids like you've heard of essential amino acids. And fats are really important for our energy as well, and our hormones in our body, and helping us absorb fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. And the last macronutrient is fiber, and again, really important. Fibre is a type of carbohydrate that is found in plant foods and the body cannot digest them. So fibre is found in soluble fibre, so we find that in our beans and nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables, and they keep your stools nice and soft. And then the insoluble fibre is what pushes everything through, and it adds good bulk to your stool. And we find that in avocados and again in nuts and lots of green leafy vegetables. Fibre is really important for digestive health. It helps control your glucose, which we're going to look at later. Great for our heart, and it's really important for weight management. It makes us feel full, keeps our blood glucose nice and stable. So there are 4 macronutrients. So let's have a look at how these foods are impacting the blood sugar levels in our body. So we can very simply see here that when we eat a carbohydrate, whether it's the simple sugary things, whether it's the starchy foods or the natural sugars, they're creating an increase in glucose in the blood, and protein and fat produces it to a lesser degree. So if we start to think of your blood glucose with your type 2 diabetes, where you've been having trouble with elevated glucose, or maybe you're pre-diabetic and your sugars are just starting to pop up, if we're eating a lot of carbohydrates, then technically you can see that we're going to put a lot of pressure in our bloodstream with a lot of sugar in the blood. And if we're eating a more protein dominant diet and plenty of healthy fats, then we're actually going to create less glucose loading in the blood. So we can start to see how maybe a low carbohydrate diet might actually be a benefit to helping to lower the amount of sugar in our blood. And ideally, we've learned that carbohydrate technically isn't essential, and that you can make the little bit of sugar that you need for your body from other food sources. And let's look at fibre. We talked about fibre being a carbohydrate that really doesn't have a big impact on our glucose. You can see here that our sugar levels are really fairly nice and stable. And if we're eating a lot of these sort of high fibre vegetables throughout the day, it's going to help keep our glucose nice and stable, which is what we want. So then let's see how this impacts insulin. And what we can see is that if we're eating carbohydrate, we know that that increases our glucose, and so therefore it also creates a need for insulin to be produced, because insulin transports that sugar into your cells to be used for energy. Protein and fat to a lesser degree. Now we know that if we've got blood glucose that is elevated and it's higher than it should be, which is why we've been diagnosed with type 2 or pre-diabetes, we can start to see that that must mean our insulin isn't working as well. And what starts to happen if you're eating a lot of carbohydrate and you're having to produce a lot of insulin and your insulin isn't been working as well, you're sort of overstressing that insulin system. You're making that body try to produce lots of insulin to try and bring the sugars down. And obviously, if your glucose is higher than it should be, it's not doing a very good job. Protein and fat to a lesser degree are producing an insulin response. And if we want to start helping to improve our blood glucose, we want to start making sure we can reduce the impact of the foods that release the sugar and require so much insulin. So again, we can start to see if we can improve our diet with a little bit more protein and fat and start to lower carbohydrate, we'll actually start to put less pressure on our insulin system, which hasn't been doing a very good job because our glucose have been high and we've either got pre or type 2 diabetes. And let's look at good old fibre again. You can again see that fibre just wraps itself around everything. It slows down digestion and it creates a really nice stabilized insulin. So we must make sure that we want to eat plenty of fibre throughout the day, because it's giving us really good benefits to our glucose and insulin. And we want to rely more on our protein and healthy fats and less on our carbohydrate foods to start to create more stabilized glucose and make our insulin do less work. And let's look at a little bit more. Let's look at sugars and carbohydrates. What we can see here is that when we're eating our carbohydrates, as we've already seen, it releases glucose into the blood. And when you have type 2 or pre-diabetes, you're not obviously bringing the sugar in your blood down as well as you could be. And you've also therefore got a form of insulin resistance now going on, because your insulin's resisting. It's not able to manage the glucose load as well as it could. So when you eat carbohydrates, you keep reducing a lot of insulin, and it's wearing your insulin system out, and your sugar levels are spiking a little bit. They're not being managed, and they're not sitting within the ideal ranges that they should be. And that's where we want to try and help your body by lowering the amount of sugar in the blood that it has to deal with, and by giving the insulin a rest. If we can give our insulin a rest, then our bodies actually, I say if you go on a holiday, you work better. So if we can put insulin on a holiday, we can actually ensure that it will get a little bit of a rest, and we rely on more protein throughout the day, healthy fats, and those fabulous above ground green leafy veggies. And what we'll see is that it'll start to lessen the amount of glucose in the blood. It'll start to stabilize it. It'll start to put less pressure on your insulin system. Your insulin doesn't have to do as much work because there's not as much glucose in the blood. And if we can rest that insulin over time and start overproducing it, it can actually start to become more sensitive. And that's where we can start to see our diabetes going into some form of remission. And we know that insulin resistance is the root cause of a lot of chronic disease. And insulin resistance creates prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. It's involved with PCOS and atherosclerosis, dyslipidemia, and hypertension. There are many things that also create insulin resistance, and obesity, which I want to highlight, can create insulin resistance, but it's also two-way. Insulin resistance can also create obesity, because insulin is a lipogenic hormone, and it actually is involved in fat storage. So we really need to actually be getting some control and improvement over insulin resistance to help improve our health, to help with preventing or putting our type 2 diabetes or our pre-diabetes into remission, and actually being able to try and help ourselves with our weight as well. And I explained to my clients, who a lot of them have struggled, or you as the client or patient have struggled with your weight over a long period of time. And that is often because you've been struggling with insulin resistance for a long period of time and just didn't know it. And when we're consuming carbohydrates, we're requiring our pancreas to excrete the insulin to manage the carbohydrate. And over years and years and years, those cells have become more and more resistant because they've been bathed in excess insulin over time. And so what happens when our bodies are actually getting bathed in too much insulin because we're eating more carbohydrates than maybe genetically our bodies are sort of being able to manage, is that we start to go into this fat storage lockdown. And if you think of a fat cell, a balloon of fat, is that when there's a lot of insulin flowing through the system, it actually stimulates these two pathways called glucose transporter and lipoprotein lipase. And these two things stuff fat and sugar into your cell. And it also blocks the access of the fat. So the sugar and the fat's getting overstored, and insulin's blocking your body's ability to get the fat tap and let the fat out. And it also makes you hungry. So you're hangry or you're hungry, you're eating more carbohydrate, you're producing more insulin, it's overstimulating processes that store fat in, and it's broken your fat tap to let fat out. So the problem starts to become that you're in this fat storage mode all the time. And if you're eating a lot of carbohydrate all the time, and then you go on a low-calorie diet, but you're still eating low-calorie carbohydrate, you're having the rice cracker and the sweet potato, and you're drinking a shake that's low-calorie but high sugar or carbohydrate, even though you're eating less calories, your body's producing a lot of insulin from those low-calorie foods that are high in carbohydrate. You keep producing too much insulin, your insulin's storing and blocking the fat access, your body can't get the fat, and therefore your metabolic rate sort of regulates itself and slows down because it can't get to the fuel it needs, and you're not feeding it. It can't get to your fat stores properly. And that's why you've struggled with dropping maybe your weight as well over the years with all the diets that you've done. And as the years go by, our body gets more resistant. That's often a light bulb moment. This is me talking to you as the practitioner, as so many people go, that is why I've gone on all these diets and I just can't lose weight. It's not a calorie game, it's an insulin game. And this usually gives people really powerful light bulb moments, and they feel really inspired to understand their body type and maybe why they struggled with their weight and why they're struggling with their glucose levels. They might be eating the good diet. They come in, they're saying, I'm eating a great diet. I eat whole grain breads and cereals and sweet potato, and I've got my 3 or 4 fruits a day, but they're not getting anywhere with preventing or reducing their glucose levels and putting their type 2 or their pre-diabetes into remission. And then they start to understand why. So when we start to look at it again, if we're eating a lot of carbohydrate and we have type 2 or pre-diabetes, we're struggling with obesity, we can see that even if we're eating a sort of standard Australian diet with whole grain breads and cereals, we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the glucose system. We're going to have to produce a lot of insulin to try and bring it down. We're wearing it out. The sugars aren't coming down. We're putting more belly fat on because insulin is lipogenic. It's storing fat around your tummy, and that's creating more insulin resistant. And you know, if you are eating a lot of sugar in your diet, then absolutely get that out first. That's definitely going to improve your glucose and your insulin and your belly fat and your weight. But if you're not eating those foods every day, but you are eating a lot of carbohydrate and not enough protein and healthy fats and greens, then you can see by lowering that, what's going to happen. Less carbohydrate, less glucose in the blood, reduced belly fat, and improving your insulin sensitivity, which is a big cause for chronic disease. So we can start to see how a low carbohydrate diet can actually help you. And here again, what we see is if we start to put that insulin resistance and that diabetes into some form of remission, then your body becomes less resistant over time because it's not spewing out so much insulin, and your glucose starts to improve. You start to use your fat as a fuel now because you become fat adapted. You start to lose weight and you're not hungry anymore. And so the cycle starts to unravel and we start to put our condition into some form of remission. And you are going to become a fat burning machine. So what happens if you take carbohydrates away? Your body needs energy, clearly. We need energy to fuel our body. We need to be able to get up and walk around, and we need to look after the kids and do our shopping and go to work. So what is our body going to use as a fuel if we've taken carbohydrate away? Your body's actually going to start to use fat. And what your body will do is it will break down fat. It'll break down fat in food. It will use fat in your body, which is great news. It'll take the fat around the belly. It'll take the visceral fat in your organs. And by the liver, it makes ketones. And these ketones you can look at as your new petrol. Your cells are really clever in your body. Your mitochondria are the powerhouse of your cells. And they can use ketones or they can use sugar. And so what we're doing is we're making them use ketones as their new petrol. And ketones do some wonderful things. And we're not talking about ketoacidosis. And it's really important as a patient that you're discussing this with your doctor, because there are certain medications that we need to be looking out for that may have a risk for you. If you're not on any medications or you're on oral hypoglycemic like metformin, then you're not going to have any ketoacidosis, but it's important that you speak to your doctor. Let's get this new petrol happening. Your cells are going to burn these ketones as their fuel, so they don't need the carbohydrate. And remember, your body's going to make the small amount of carbohydrate or sugar that it needs from your sort of non-carbohydrate petrol sources. So it's going to make it from fat and it's going to make it from meat. And it will give you that little bit of sugar that you need, and the rest of your body cells are going to fuel off your new petrol, which is ketones. Ketones are great little things. They actually reduce hunger. You get a stabilization of your ghrelin and leptin hormones, which make you hungry and make you feel less full. They're a great anti-inflammatory. There are a lot of things in our body that ketones can help to reduce the inflammatory pathways. They reduce reactive oxidation species that can create damage in our body. They block inflammatory pathways in our body. So ketones are really good, and you might actually feel an ache or pain in your body that was there that's gone. So they can help with inflammation. They're great antioxidants, and they're really great for your gut microbiome. So if you're having some niggles or some gut issues, you feel like you're not digesting, you feel bloated, you have some IBS, They can actually improve your gut microbiome. They can improve the cells in your gut, make them stick together better, and that can actually improve your gut issues you may have. They're great for genes, and they're also fantastic transmitters in our brain. So we can feel like we're thinking more clearly. You may say things like, oh, my brain fog feels like it's better. And we can see there's studies showing improvements for mental health and dementia and Alzheimer's. So ketones are a really great petrol to have. And if you take away carbohydrates, you're still going to be energized by petrol. You're just not going to use sugar petrol. You're going to use ketone petrol. And I'm going to give you some resources because it's important for you to empower yourself with knowledge. And there are a lot of websites out there with some resources I can share with you. I like to let you have a look at the Diabetes Australia website. They've got some great discussions and resources about low carb, and their diabetes position statement is talking about that people with type 2 diabetes, that there is a reliable evidence that low carb eating can be safe and useful in lowering average blood glucose levels in the short. David Unwin's 8-year study that came out showing 90% of patients following a low carbohydrate approach had improved diabetes control, 77% of which achieved type 2 diabetes remission. And so we can see that even with pre-diabetes, they were achieving normal blood glucose. So there's some good science that you can start to read to learn more. And it's really a great resource, is the Defeat Diabetes online program. It's really got everything you need in one platform. It's going to teach you all about low carb from sort of the beginning to the end. There's a lot of recipe ideas that you can learn how to feed your family and feed your body low carb. There's a lot of resource articles and research and scientific papers and books that you can access. And you'll get great lectures from low carb dietitians like myself, and also Dr. Paul Mason and Dr. Peter Bruckner. And we know that Defeat Diabetes have partnered with Diabetes Australia. So it's such a strong partnership to really start to learn a new way of maybe managing your chronic disease, your diabetes, your pre-diabetes, and your weight. So what do we mean by low carb? Today, you need to understand what I am actually meaning when I say we need to go on a low carbohydrate diet. So I want to define a low carbohydrate diet for you, which technically is just going to be limiting carbohydrates, which we're going to go through, include a protein-rich animal food, include healthy fats, and plenty of above ground veggies, which you know are all our fiber. Now, just taking you're not my patients at the moment, you are all the allied health and the doctors and nurses out there. What do I mean by a low carbohydrate diet? So just for your own information, a therapeutic carbohydrate reduction therapy definition is a low carbohydrate diet being defined as less than 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. And a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet is dropping it to around 10% of calories. So we're looking at 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. I personally give my patients a 50-gram target, just so that when they start to look at food and how much carbohydrates in there, they can really get a good understanding of how they might be able to meet a 50-gram carbohydrate level a day. But at the end of the day, if your patients are reducing their carbohydrates, they're lowering and they're going on a low carbohydrate diet. So therapeutic carbohydrate reduction is really any intervention that starts to drop carbohydrates less than 130 grams per day. And you can individualize that for your patient. You may also just simply say, these are carbohydrates, let's eat less. These are our protein and fats, which I'm going to take you through in a moment. And again, for your information or for your patient's information, there is a significant amount of obviously carbohydrate in the standard Australian diet. And the Australian Health Survey in 2011-2012 showed that carbohydrates at that point contributed to 45% of the daily energy of Australians. And that actually was equivalent to around 230 to 300 grams of carbohydrate per adult for an average adult per day. And the guidelines can recommend up to 65% or 60% of energy coming from carbohydrates. So for a metabolically well person, that's great. They can burn them and they've got really healthy glucose. They've got no metabolic syndrome. but we can start to see if people are consuming a lot, this much carbohydrate, and they have diabetes, that this can become a problem, or they're struggling with pre-diabetes or obesity, which they would have insulin resistance often as well. And I always let my patients know that 4 grams of carbohydrate is technically a teaspoon of some form of sugar that your body has to deal with. So I like to sort of plant that seed. 4 carbs, a teaspoon of sugar. And so we need to look at foods and how much carbohydrate is in everything, so you can start to try and save some carbohydrate or some sugar in your blood. And in the standard Australian diet, that means we could be having up to 57 to 75 grams of impactable sugar in our bloodstream, which if you've got insulin resistance and you've got already high blood glucose, you know, that's a lot of pressure on your body to have to manage. If we can take that pressure off and make it convert to using the new petrol of ketones, we can start to improve our glucose and improve our insulin sensitivity. So again, you are my patient again. And what does 50 grams of carbohydrate look like? Or you may just want to be talking about things to your patients about, let's look at what carbohydrates are and how much carbohydrate is in everything. And remember what we've said, 4 grams of carb is a teaspoon of sugar. Where can you save your body from having too much impactable carbohydrate in your diet? Sorry. So we look at the starchy carbohydrates, and I look at the high carbohydrate foods in the diet. And for analysis, we've just done the carbohydrates per 100 grams. Now, we know that the foods at the bottom of this page are foods that we obviously know we should be trying to avoid if we can on most occasions, because we know they're going to release sugar. We know sweet biscuits and sweet sauces, honey, which many people don't realise is you know, pure sugar still. Jams, even if they're no added sugar. Ice cream, cakes, you know, potato chips may have no added sugar, but they're going to release as glucose in your blood. Lollies and soft drinks. So we know most of those things we shouldn't be having a lot of. But what we can also see is whole grain breads and cereals, pastas and rice, quinoa, breakfast cereal and crackers have a lot of carbohydrate in them. And so if our bodies have to break those down and we already have high blood glucose, then this can put a lot of pressure on the blood. Now, again, if you are having lots of Coke and soft drinks and lollies and lots of jam and biscuits and cakes, and you're putting lots of honey on everything, then absolutely drop those things first and you're going on a low carbohydrate diet. But if you're not having a lot of those things, but you are eating a big bowl of cereal for breakfast, and you're eating, you know, bread at lunchtime, and you're having crackers in the afternoon, and you're having a big bowl of pasta for dinner, and you're having some more crackers after, you know, after your evening meal, then you can see that that's a lot of natural sugar that your body's having to manage. So wherever you can, we want to try and reduce those carbohydrates, whether you limit them, whether you avoid them, you know, that's a decision that you can make. The main thing is we start to lower the amount of carbohydrate in the diet. Now let's look at fruit. And again, fruit is a healthy food with lots of fiber. But if you have blood glucose problems, if you are eating a lot of fruit in your diet and your sugars are high, you've got pre-diabetes, you're struggling with your weight, then you need to look at lowering the amount of fruit. Now, fruit juice is particularly high in sugar without any fiber in it. So, you know, fruits juiced is not what we want at all. Dried fruit, super high. But let's say you're eating a banana, you know, and a pear every day, and you're eating a bunch of grapes. You can see again that that's going to break down to a sugar in your blood, fructose and glucose sugar. And again, if your body's got insulin resistance and you're struggling to get your glucose down, these are going to have an impact. So we might limit or avoid too much fruit in our diet. And as I often say, fruit is nature's candy. If we go back, you know, when fruit was more wild, we can see that the wild banana, you know, first cultivated 7,000 years ago in Papua New Guinea. These bananas were really stocky. They had big seeds in them. There was very minimal fruit on the interior or flesh to eat. So there were a lot more fiber in them. There was a lot less edible fruit. And so the carbohydrate content was a lot lower. In today's bananas, we've sort of cultivated them and we've blended these wild bananas together, and we've made these more modern bananas to be much sweeter. And what you can see is the seeds are smaller. There's a lot more edible flesh. So we're going to get a lot more fructose and glucose in our bloodstream. So again, if we can limit the amount of total fruit that we're having, we can help reduce some pressure on our body. Below ground vegetables, particularly down the end of the potatoes. You know, if we're having lots of potatoes and lots of carrots with our meal, you know, and more of the mashed spuds than we've got of our lamb chops, then again, our body's got to have to deal with that carbohydrate, deal with that glucose. You know, if you search what does a potato break down to, we know it's going to break down to glucose in your blood. So trying to limit or avoid the amount of below ground vegetables. And as I say, you know, look, you're not going to, you know, it's okay to use onions and you can eat some carrots and beetroots in your salad, but try and incorporate more vegetables that have less of a carbohydrate or glucose impact on your blood and contain a lot more fiber and less sugar, which we'll go through. So I want you to include plenty of low-carb vegetables, or really mostly those that grow above the ground. And what you can see by the number there is that number is reflective of how many carbohydrates again. So before, and we'll flick back for a minute, we can see that white potatoes have 15 grams of carbohydrate, sweet potatoes have 17 grams of carbohydrate. We just saw before that our banana has up to 20 grams of carbohydrate. So the volume of carbohydrate in these foods is high, and that's breaking down to sugar in your blood. Now, if we go to the below ground vegetables, we can see that the number sitting next to that food is quite low. So it's really not producing really any glucose into your blood. And there's so much fiber wrapped around these foods that you're not going to get an impact on your sugar levels. So I want you to eat lots more above ground vegetables, and I want you to limit your below ground vegetables. And if you can start to do that, you're going to stabilize your glucose even more. You could throw in some spinach at breakfast time with a protein-rich omelette. You can have a nice big green salad with avocado at lunchtime, and kale and capsicum. And then for dinner, lots of broccolini and steamed cauliflower with your protein. So even when you're snacking, and we'll go through snack ideas, is to include fiber throughout the day to keep wrapping itself around all your meals. And remember, the glucose and the insulin graph we looked at was nice and flat. So have these vegetables with every meal. Try and limit those below ground vegetables. Try not eat loads of fruit every day, particularly dried fruit and juice. And that's starting to help lower your glucose in your blood. And if you're going to include fruit, berries are great. They're great antioxidant, they're great fiber. They're not going to give you a huge glucose load. Again, if you can see here, your strawberries, blueberries, cranberries, and blackberries are fairly low. Blueberries are higher than all the others, but certainly they're low in a banana. When we saw the banana, it was 20 carbs. We saw the apples and pears, they were probably around 12 to 14. So try and throw more berries into your diet in between your meals, and make sure you're adding some good above ground green leafy vegetables with every meal you eat. And proteins are the big guns. So really it's so important that you're including plenty of protein. I see so many people coming into the clinic and they have sarcopenia. They have low muscle mass, but high body fat. Or maybe they're TOFIs and they're thin on the outside and skinny on the inside, but they've still got low muscle mass. We need to improve our muscle mass in society, and you need to eat more protein. And if you can see the number there next to the meat and the lamb and the pork and the kangaroo and the chicken and the fish and the tuna and seafood, there's no carbohydrates. There's going to be no release of glucose technically in your blood. So you're going to get that nice sort of lower amount of glucose, you know, spike in your blood. So you must include protein with every meal, whether that's some eggs for breakfast, and maybe you're having some barbecue chicken for lunch, and you've had a nice lean steak for dinner. And maybe as your snack, instead of grabbing banana and grapes and having some dried fruit, you might grab an egg, a tin of tuna, and maybe some smoked salmon. And protein, how much do we need? And what I want you to think about is we ideally need to be getting maybe 80 to 100 grams of protein in our diet every day to really maintain good muscle mass and muscle health. And what does that look like? Well, if you think of the palm of your hand, that would maybe give you 30 grams of protein. So really in a day, think 3 eggs would be 1 serve of protein, and that's only going to give you 30 grams of protein. If you have a little quarter of a barbecue chicken at lunch, that's only going to give you 30 grams of protein, or a small chicken breast. If you go and have a nice steak for dinner, another 30 grams of protein. So in a day, I ask you, are you eating enough protein? Are you having 3 eggs, a Scotch fillet, and a chicken breast over the day? And most people are not. So if you're not eating enough protein, you can replace some of your carbohydrate and have more protein. Maybe you're having the omelette for breakfast and you're throwing in some spinach that grows above the ground and some avocado. And then maybe at lunch, you've got your chicken breast with your green leafy veggies, and you've had a salmon steak in the evening. And we actually know protein fills us. Protein creates satiety. It makes us feel full. You never hear someone going, I couldn't stop eating steak. But you definitely hear people saying, I couldn't stop eating potato chips. So protein in meat and chicken and fish and eggs and prawns and seafood, they just give you a lot of satiety. You'll feel full. You probably don't even need to snack in the end because you'll just feel full for longer. And as your body's making new petrol out of your ketones, making ketones for you from fat, you're not needing those sugar hits more frequently because you're not running out of glucose. And your body's got unlimited ketones, really, if you've got body fat. And we all have body fat, even if we're lean. So make sure you're eating your 100 grams of protein a day. Now, lentils and chickpeas and legumes are on this list still, because if you're vegetarian and vegan, you still need to be eating your good protein sources. But I'm going to encourage you to eat more tofu and tempeh and get creative with more of that in your diet, because legumes and lentils will still create more glucose. They have a lot of fiber, and the fiber will slow down the release. But at the end of the day, the body still has to manage carbohydrate in the blood. And if it's not doing a good job, the more rest we can give it, the better. And dairy is important. It's good for bone health. It's good for muscle health. We need calcium. And, I always say there was no low-fat cow on the paddock, so we really should just eat real dairy. So eat your cheese, cook with a little bit of butter, eat hard cheese or some soft cheese, make a nice cream sauce. And what we can see with our dairy is generally there's minimal carbohydrate. That number that you see under the butter, under the cheeses is very, very low. So that's creating minimal impact on your glucose in your blood. So include some cheese as a snack, maybe with some celery or maybe with some cucumbers. And then, again, grate some on your salad, throw some feta into your beautiful salad at lunch, have some cottage cheese on celery. Yogurt is great. We want a no added sugar Greek yogurt. It's going to have a little bit more carbohydrate in it just because it's natural lactose, and lactose still breaks down to glucose and galactose. Sweetened yogurts, obviously, we avoid because they not only got the natural sugar, but then they've got the added sugar, which is not what we want. And then milk. So milk is, it is important. It's got calcium, yes. But if you've got blood sugar problems, and some people are having 3 lattes a day, or they're having, Nicole, I'm having 3 glasses of no added sugar iced coffee every day, plus I've got my yogurts. And what we can find is it's still too much. The lactose is breaking down to glucose and galactose, so the body still has to deal with it. So be very careful with how much milk you're drinking and make sure your yogurt doesn't have any added sugar. So dairy is important and we want to include it. And we should include healthy fats. Healthy fats are important for our bodies to function, to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, to give us fuel. And as we can see, our bodies can turn fat into that petrol when we're taking the carbohydrate away. So add avocado and eat eggs. And it's a myth that eggs give you cholesterol. So enjoy your eggs. You do not need to only eat 1 to 2 a day. Have nuts as snacks with your berries, because remember we said berries are good, and have nuts with some cheese and some cucumber. So you can start to see you're putting ideas together. Olive oil, coconut oil, or butter. Butter is a very saturated fat and it doesn't oxidize on cooking. Cheese, cream for a nice sauce, maybe some nut butters to put on a celery stick. So please include healthy fats in your day. You don't have to do that ketogenic stuff you see out there where they're wrapping bacon around cheese and dipping it in cream. Include healthy fats in moderation throughout the day. We're flipping the pyramid up. We're encouraging you to not have sugar, to reduce or avoid your starchy carbohydrates, plenty of fats and healthy protein, and low-carb vegetables and fruits that grow above the ground. So we're just going to flip the pyramid up. So really that diet pyramid, the traditional standard Australian diet, or SAD diet as I might call it for people with metabolic health problems, is that the standard Australian diet will work if you're metabolically well. And those people walking around that don't have the visceral fat and they're lean and they eat as much as they like and they have no cholesterol, they don't have any metabolic issues at all, they don't have blood pressure, high waist tip fat, high blood sugars, fatty liver, then yes, they can follow the Australian standard diet. But if you have health issues, we're flipping it up. We're giving your body a chance to make different petrol and to reduce the amount of glucose loading in the blood and improve insulin sensitivity. So really the simple macro formula is this: limit or avoid carbohydrates, sugary foods, bread, cereals, root vegetables. Prioritize your protein, which is anything really that comes from an animal. And that's your meat, your chicken, your fish, your egg, your pork, your roast beef. Eat healthy fats to satiety and have plenty of above ground fibery green leafy veggies. So avoid carbs. The formula is prioritize a protein with a healthy fat and an above ground vegetable for fiber. And that's the simple formula. So let's look at this plate and start to visualize how you might put some food ideas together that are based on our macronutrient formula. We have some protein from some nuts or some meat or some eggs with some dairy protein like some yogurt or cheese. We're including a healthy fat, some olive oil, and some above ground veggies and maybe some berries. So we can start to pluck out food ideas, and we're going to come back to this. And this is really what a low carbohydrate diet looks like. Super healthy, lots of whole real foods, no processed foods still, but we're just not including the carbohydrates. Think about being a caveman, or I should say a cavewoman. We did hunt and catch our food. So we would hunt for the fish and the meat and the chicken. We gathered eggs. So I want you to be the caveman. Think about what was running past that cave. Go and gather your eggs, hunt and catch your meat. You gathered nuts and berries and seeds, and you ate fruit seasonally. You didn't go and juice your fruit. And, you ate it not every day. You ate it when it was available. So that's how we should be living. Unprocessed food. So you are now the cave person. And if we can catch it, we can eat it. So I want you to go out there and wherever you are, think about those strategies. If I can catch it, I can eat it, except for people, of course. Eat what ran past the cave. Did a loaf of bread or a bowl of granola run past the cave? No. So that image of seeing the caveman sort of roasting his bowl of granola is kind of not fitting very well. So eat what ran past the cave. Try and create your food from that. So how are we going to organise our pantry and fridge to make it a little bit more low carb friendly? So I'm going to give you a few tips about how you can make over your pantry. I'm going to show you some swaps of what you can swap for low carb, for high carb to low carb food staples, and to fill your fridge and freezer. What sort of low carb things can we fill that with? So I actually give my patients shopping guides because, obviously time is of the essence still in a clinical setting, but I'll give them all shopping guides. So I'm giving you this shopping guide. And in Defeat Diabetes, they have a great shopping guide. So it's really easy for your patients to be able to look at those shopping lists and go out and do their shopping. Everyday foods that we should have in our fridge. We should have our eggs. One of my clients said today they couldn't find any eggs. I said, thank goodness I bought 6 dozen because I have children that eat lots of eggs. Cheese, all sorts of different cheeses, butter, sour cream and heavy cream, full-fat dairy, yogurt without any sugar or Greek yogurt. Maybe you've got full-fat milk, you've got nut milk, you've got liver, pate, dips. These are things we should have in our fridge. In our vegetable compartment, anything that grows above the ground, and berries. So, you know, get your capsicums and your mushrooms and your cucumbers in there, and your bags of kale slaw. Have your different punnets of berries, fresh or frozen. And we should have animals in there. So beef and beef patties and meatballs and chicken thigh and kebabs. You know, go to your local amazing butcher and get some kebabs on sticks and buy the meat patties. Get some good quality deli meats, you know, not the pressed chicken, but you know, the beef that's come off the bone, and, you know, ham without, you know, off your bone. So real deli meats, not processed deli meats. Get fresh salmon, smoked salmon, steak, sausages, lean bacon. These are the things we should have all in our fridge. And what should we have in the pantry instead of all our flours and breakfast cereals? We should have things like olives and pickles and mustards and hot sauces because they don't have many carbs in them. We're going to do some label reading. Lots of different dry roasted or raw nuts. Beef jerky is great. Tinned fish of any sort in olive oil. Nori sheets, which are seaweed sheets, which are fantastic to do wraps in. The low-carb breads that are on your marker, and although they're a little bit more processed, they're a good backup tool. Good fat mayonnaise made out of olive oil and not nasty seed oils. Avocado oil and coconut oil are great. Olive oil, red wine, or apple cider vinegar. Even peanut butter if you get a natural one without any added sugar. Little pickles, jalapenos, coconut milk and cream. I often recommend the mingle sauces with no nasties in them. Good old Parmesan cheese. Of course, dark chocolate, 80% plus, and almond and coconut flour for lots of baking. On the Defeat Diabetes, there are loads of recipes and muffins that are all made from coconut and almond flour instead of flour or wheat flour. In our freezer, all the above ground frozen veggies, and frozen veggies are just as good. They're snap frozen. Our berries are avocado frozen to put in our smoothies. And then make sure you've got, again, your protein staples. You've got some roasting meats in there and chicken. You've got your pork and your pork tenderloins. You've got bags of frozen prawns and salmon steaks ready to chuck in the air fryer. And just make sure you've got all those things. And you can create great recipe ideas. And again, Defeat Diabetes does have a red, amber, and green list. So often I recommend that patients take that list and they can go out there and shop accordingly. And then they can build their meals around those food staples. So what are some shopping strategies? If we're in that supermarket and there's all these aisles, where do I start? Because I'm just learning about low carb and all I can see is that I can't eat this, this, and this. What can I eat? So where can I start? So we're going to talk about the best aisles that you can go to, and we're going to talk about, again, that sort of hunt-gatherer concept. So really the simplicity is focus on your outer aisles when you go into the shop. That's where you're going to find all your fresh produce. You're going to find all your fresh veggies and your berries. You're going to find your meat and your seafood and your chicken and your pork chops. You're going to find all your dairy in the dairy cabinet, so your cheese, yogurt, and all your dairy products, your milk. And you're going to find your healthy fats. You've got your avocados there. You'll find your nuts and seeds. So just go to the outer aisles. Think about that plate we looked at and just start gathering those foods that fit on that plate. Avoid the middle aisles. That's where you're going to get all your packaged stuff. That's where you're getting your sugary snacks, your desserts, your cereals with all the added sugars in there, your pasta, your breads and your cereals, all your processed food. So we want to get away from the ultra processed and go to the outer aisle where we know we're getting all that good quality, unprocessed food that's not in a package, that's pretty much in itself its own ingredients, where you can create your own recipes. And again, I love using that hunt and gather concept. You know, smart low carb shopping is really about if you can catch it or you can gather it in the cave. If it ran past the cave, if you gather it when you're in the cave, then you can add it to your trolley. So, just thinking about that simplicity and putting those things in to create your meals with your eggs and your meat and your fish and your nuts and all your vegetables. So you can start making that beef stir fry with the broccolini and the omelette with the spinach and the salmon steak with the smashed avocado on the side, drizzled with, slithers of almonds and some steamed broccolini. And we can start to see how we can make great meals and food using real food, using food that doesn't create that big glucose load in the blood. So what are we going to look for in our labels? And today I'm just going to focus for you on some simple tips to make sure that you're not getting too many nasty oils in your diet, and that you're getting products that are not going to give you a lot of carbohydrate or sugar that your body has to manage. So we're going to look at the labels, identify hidden sugars and high carb foods, and we're going to look at what some of those nutrition claims might mean. So some 101s are, when you're looking at products and you want to compare the pair and you want to look at two breads, for example, then I would always suggest you look at the total carbohydrate per serving. If we can compare products per 100 grams, we can start to get a good idea of how much carbohydrate this bread has over this bread. So you can see here that the low-carb Helga bread has 21.5 grams of carb per 100 grams, whereas the Bergen 85% has 1.6. And then if you went and grabbed a normal Helga's bread, it might have 40 grams of carbohydrate per serve. Now, remember we said every 4 grams of carb is a teaspoon of sugar. So we can start to see which bread we might want to choose and put in our trolley. And so the Bergen 85% low-carb bread would be your choice. Now, again, I just said if you can catch it, you can eat it, and we didn't see low-carb bread run past the cave. But, there are some times we're going to need some flexibility with this, and that we want to make that sandwich, or we want to use some pasta. So there are products out there that you can use, and as long as you're balancing with non-processed food that are not in packages, you can still have some of these foods. So we're first of all looking at per 100 grams, and we're looking at total carbohydrate. You do not need to look at the sugar, because the sugar's included in that carbohydrate value. So I really just want you to look at the total carbohydrates per serving to compare. Once you've decided which one's got the less carbs per serve, and you're seeing, those carbs, how many teaspoons of sugar is going to impact my body, you then want to have a bit of a look at the serving size and how many carbs per serving and how many serves you're going to have. So what we can see here is that this particular product has 18.9 grams of carbohydrate per serving. And there's 16 servings in that particular product. So I want you to think about how many servings you're going to eat. Now, already we can see that's too many grams of carbohydrate, so we wouldn't consume this particular product. If the product had a good amount of carbohydrate, and I tend to sort of try and keep it under 4, because I'm thinking a teaspoon of sugar. So if I can keep that carbohydrate at less than 4 grams per serving, I'm happy with that. But I'm also going to keep in mind how many servings. Maybe I'm going to have 5 servings. Maybe I'm going to have 10. Maybe I need the whole packet. So I think you have to be very mindful of comparing products per 100 grams and looking total carbohydrate, remembering 4 carbs is a teaspoon of sugar, look for the lowest carb option, and then just check the serving size and make sure that also fits with the under 4 grams of carb, and think about how many servings you're going to have. Also, when I'm looking at label reading, and this, I can see here that the red circles are not quite in the right spot. So when we're reading labels, we're trying to avoid seed and vegetable oils, and we're trying to avoid added sugar as well. So what we can see here in this ingredients list, that red line should be covering, circling the sugar, and the second red line would be circling the vegetable oil. So in this particular product, we can see that the third ingredient is sugar and the fourth ingredient is vegetable oils. And vegetable oils are heavily oxidized oils when they're processed, and the omega-6 in those oils are quite vulnerable to oxidation when they're processed, and then you consume them. So they're not good, and studies have shown that they can create inflammation and impact our insulin resistance and can be just as bad as sugar. So you want to read your ingredients list, and you're looking for those words that have sugar in them, and you're also looking to avoid vegetable oils as well. So if you do pick up a product that actually seems okay, just check the ingredients that it doesn't actually have any added sugar still in there, or vegetable oils. And what I was going to say, so I kind of ruined the surprise, is if you looked at the ingredients list and you really don't know what that product is, then you really shouldn't be consuming it anyway. And what we saw here is this is water, almonds, sugar, canola and sunflower oil, maltodextrin, acidity regulators, citrate, phosphate, gums, etc., some minerals in there. What is it? And it's a nut milk. So it's really important, even if the carbs look good, you really need to check your ingredients list still closely because there might be still some nasties in there. And I just wanted to be very careful with these sort of no added sugar products. A lot of them have maltitol, and maltitol is a specific sweetener that actually still has some calories, but predominantly can actually increase your glucose. So if you're eating a lot of these no added sugar bars, which are kind of processed, they're going to create problems still potentially with your glucose. So if you're eating them and your sugars are not coming down or they're going up, then you really should avoid them. They have a GI between 26 to 52, and glycemic index or GI is sort of how quickly the sugar is released, and glucose is the sort of standard measure against which we measure GI against. So 26 up to 52, particularly 52, is pretty high on the scale if you think of glucose being 100. So eating a lot of no added sugar products, particularly with sweetener, is an issue. So we can see the label here, the per serving looks great. It's 0 carbs and there's no carbs per 100 pretty much. But it potentially can still give you some issues with the sweetener that's in there, because in Australia, we don't have to include the sweetener in the carbohydrate total because it's not technically absorbed by the body. So watch those sweeteners. What about no added sugar claims? I get people coming in and you're eating lots of no added sugar biscuits. Your sugars are still high. You're struggling with your weight. And that is because a no added sugar claim doesn't mean it's low in carbohydrate. It will still have a lot of flours or thickeners in there that can create it. And sometimes no added sugar can still mean they can add natural sugar. So there might be a natural honey or a natural, coconut sugar. And so you can get these claims, but they've still got lots of sugar in them. And you can see this biscuit here is 10.4 grams of carb per serving, which is 2 biscuits, which is still giving you 2 teaspoons of impactable sugar that your body has to deal with. And gluten-free doesn't mean low carb. In fact, gluten-free often means there's a lot more carb because they're often adding sugar to a lot of gluten-free products, particularly some of the new breads coming out, which is why they're nice and soft and moist and not as dry. So the drier the gluten-free bread, often the less sugar that's been added. So some of these particular products can have as much as 50 grams of carbohydrates in 2 slices of bread because they're moist and they're soft because they've got so much sugar in them. So gluten-free does not mean it's low carb, and it can often mean it's worse with the carbohydrates. So we can see here, this particular bread's got 30 grams of carbohydrate per serving. So if we were looking at the sugar, we might think it's okay, but every 4 carbs gives you a teaspoon of impactable sugar your body has to deal with. And if you have problems with insulin resistance, prediabetes, or type 2, it's a lot of pressure on your body. Beware of your olive oil claims. Olive oil is a good fat to use. It's got a lot of monounsaturated fat, so it's not high in omega-6, so it's relatively stable and doesn't have a great oxidative instability, so it won't damage your body. But if you see things with olive oil, you need to check your ingredients list. You know, something like Nuttelex olive oil, you can see here in the ingredients list, it says vegetable oil as the first ingredients, and there's 14% olive oil. So it's better off to avoid those things. Check your ingredients list. Just because something says tuna and olive oil doesn't mean it's actually in olive oil. It could still be predominantly in sunflower oil with a little bit of olive oil. So watch those inflammatory oils. And just because something says it's low carb doesn't mean it is. So again, we're looking at the carbohydrate total here per serving, and it's 25.9 grams of carbohydrate. So it technically is still high in carbs. So navigating food labels and ingredients lists, what we're really looking at is you need to compare the carbohydrates per 100 grams just to check and compare the pair. Once you've chosen something, just double check the carbs per serve and how much is a serving, and that you're getting under 4 grams of carb in a serving. Avoid vegetable and seed oils. Watch for maltitol, that sneaky sweetener. Don't rely on your claims, and remember, gluten-free doesn't mean low carb. So let's do a few cooking essentials if we're doing low carb. Let's explore low carb meal ideas and some simple low carb swaps. Really pre-planning is the key. If you're going on the low carb journey, you need to think ahead, because if you're thinking on the fly, you're going to often sort of fall down the wrong path, and you'll not be able to think outside the square of your normal carbohydrate routine. So do some pre-planning. And the basic plate planning is this: have a protein with an above ground vegetable and a healthy fat. Throw in some berries and have some dairy. So here is our plate again, and I want you to start to put together some ideas, some things you might be able to start to think about for your breakfasts, your lunches and your dinners. And you might pull 2 things from this plate. You might pull 4 things from this plate to create some ideas. So let's have a look. We could do an omelette for breakfast. We've gone and got an above ground vegetables, our spinach. We've got some eggs, which is our protein, and throwing some dairy protein in. And we're going to make that omelette up with some avocado on the side. And now we've got a low carb breakfast. Let's make a chia pudding. We've got our above ground veggies, or in this case, our berries. And we're going to combine that with some nut protein. And we're going to put some dairy protein yogurt with that. And we're going to chuck the berries and the protein in. And then we're going to top it with some healthy fats and some chia seeds. And we've got a pudding. So we can start to build these ideas. We've got our above ground green leafy vegetables, which is our lettuce, and we're going to make a wrap with that lettuce, and we're going to put turkey or chicken. We're going to put some dairy protein, some cheese, throw in some sliced avocado and make a wrap. We're also going to do some zucchini noodles, and that's our above ground vegetable. We've made some fantastic, mincemeat protein meatballs, and we're going to toss that through our steamed zucchini noodles. We're going to top it with some dairy protein. So we've got some parmesan, and we're going to throw over some healthy olive oil. And we've probably cooked our meatballs in the olive oil. We've got our dinner, which is our, again, some above ground green leafy veggie. We've got our broccolini, which we've steamed. We're serving that with a steak and some delicious dairy, which is some cream and some prawns. And then we've cooked our steak in olive oil. And now we've got steak with creamy prawns and broccolini. We can even do a dessert and not miss out on our sweet treats. So what we've got here is we've got our above ground veggies, or in this case, our berries, and we've put that with some nuts, some protein yogurt, and we've put some nice healthy fat with some 85–90% dark chocolate over the top. And now we've made a sweet using our nutrients, or our macronutrients, that don't create a lot of glucose load, but we're using very real food, non-processed. What are we swapping? Let's swap our tortillas, or our taco shells, for lettuce cups. Let's swap our burger buns for mushrooms. Or we might want to use a low-carb bread or a bread roll that we've maybe made on Defeat Diabetes. Maybe we're using lettuce. We're swapping our rice to cauli rice. We're swapping our mashed potatoes to cauli mash. We're doing pasta. We're swapping to zucchini zoodles. And there are other products out there on the market. And we're crumbing our food in breadcrumbs. So we can still do our schnitzel. We're just going to crumb it in bread, in almond meal and egg and almond meal, and we're going to fry in olive oil. So it's just starting to think about what things you're doing now. You can still have your meatballs and your wraps, and you could make your curry with your rice. You've just got to find that substitute. I always say swap the bottom and try and keep the top. And there are a lot of low-carb products out on the market. So it's a matter of having a look, reading your labels. There are breads, there are pastas, there are granolas, there are sugar. Now, obviously, like on the Defeat Diabetes website, everything's made from, non-processed ingredients. We're making bread out of almond flour. We're doing zucchini noodles and pasta. We're making granolas like Dr. Peter's Bruckner's granola with lots of nuts and seeds and coconut flakes, and we've not got any processed foods. So you can make everything from scratch, but you can also use some of these products, particularly as a transition, so it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And if you wanted to have a piece of toast for breakfast with 85% low-carb bread, you could put some protein and fat on it. some cheese and some avocado. You could certainly do a little bowl of pasta at lunch, and you could make that with some, leftover meatballs or some tinned tuna and some veggies. You could even snack on some granola, have some dark chocolate at night, and maybe you're going to make a steak sandwich for dinner. That's what I did last night, but we use low-carb bread with that, put our egg and our bacon and our cheese and our salads. So it is all about using as much real ingredients as you can, but knowing there are products to help you transition to make this less overwhelming. What about alcohol? Can I have a drink? And let's look at alcohol and understand its impact. Yes, you can have alcohol. And what we can see here is things like a martini or spirits like whiskey or white or gin or vodka or brandy don't have any carbs. So yes, you can consume them and technically not impact or increase your blood sugar. And obviously, as you start to add things to your alcohol, you're adding the tonic and you're adding the Coke and the juice, there's a lot more carbs in there. A rum and Coke set you back 39 grams or 40 grams of carb. A gin and tonic will give you 16 carbs. It's not the gin, it's the tonic because it's got the sugar in there. So don't have mixed drinks. If you are going to have alcohol, you need to be ensuring that you obviously do in moderation, but try to get drinks that are not going to have a lot of sugar or any sugar added to them. So in moderation, alcohol can be consumed. You have to be very, very careful if you're on medication, because if you're taking drinks and you are on medication for diabetes, technically gluconeogenesis or production of sugar is actually lowered on alcohol. So you actually might find your sugar levels drop a little bit. So be very careful if you're on medication. Make sure you get advice from your GP as well. Don't drink alcohol with sugar, but you must drink alcohol with food. We can see champagne or bubbly water or bubbly white, as we call it. Obviously, bubbly water is probably the ultimate. Red wine and white wine in small doses. Beer is very high in carbohydrate. So choose your alcohol that doesn't give you too much carbohydrate / sugar to manage in your blood. Be mindful of monitoring your glucose and eat. It is all about moderation still, obviously. And alcohol is a priority, it's metabolized first. So your body's going to prioritize the metabolism of alcohol over everything else, over every other energy source, because it is a toxin. And so it needs to be removed from the body quickly. So if you start to drink alcohol, it's going to impact your particularly weight loss journey as well. Your body's going to use alcohol before it makes ketones. So if weight loss is particularly your goal as well, it's going to stall your weight loss. The body will focus on breaking down alcohol, and the production of ketones from your fat is halted. And we know there's other good benefits with your ketones. Until the alcohol is fully metabolized, your body is not going to use those ketones. But if you're on diabetes medication, there is a risk, depending on your medication, of ketoacidosis, particularly if you're on a low-carb approach. So it's so important to be making sure you're chatting to your doctor and to be making sure you eat food with your alcohol. But it's really important that individualization and chatting to your low-carb dietitian, chatting to your GP to make sure you're safe. And keep an eye on your glucose levels as well. Low carb and eating out. How do we navigate a menu, and what can we look at swapping for in popular cuisines? So we can eat out. It's important that we have flexibility. And remember, you can go out and eat a pizza. It's not going to be detrimental to your health long term. It's the frequency of us eating carbohydrates all the time. If we go and have a kitchener bun, if you go and have a pizza, it's okay. It's if you're doing those things every day. If you go and enjoy some sourdough or a pasta meal at your friend's house, it's okay. It's every single day. If you've got type 2 or pre-diabetes, you've got insulin resistance, you're struggling with your weight, if every day you are constantly stimulating the need for your insulin to be overproduced, you're going to just have that struggle on a daily basis with your glucose, your weight. So you rest your body. Maybe the 80-20 rule is what we're looking at here. So you can still have those foods, but you just want to reduce the frequency your body's having to manage carbohydrate and make it use more fat as its fuel. So research your menu in advance when you're eating out, check online, always look in advance, otherwise you get in the environment with everyone else, and often we sometimes feel the pressure to go with the flow. And if you can't find anything on the menu, which most places have now, look at your entree list and see what options are there, and those things you can bring in as maybe you get 3 entrees as your main course, some fried halloumi cheese and some pan-fried calamari or some prawn kebabs, and order a side of vegetables or salad. You can ask for modifications. People often feel quite sort of uncomfortable. And as I say, if you had celiac disease or certain needs or anaphylaxis, you're going to have to ask for things. So don't be afraid to say, I don't want the potato, give me more broccolini. On the roast, give me more, cauliflower, don't give me the potato. Opt for grilled and steamed and baked. Again, choose meals centered around protein. Look for that salmon steak. Look for that steak. Add lots of non-starchy vegetables, some beautiful broccolini with almonds, and avoid those obvious high-carb foods. If you're at an Italian restaurant, go and get something grilled like the veal scallopini, or get a beautiful, pan-fried calamari or seafood dish. Ask for vegetables, avoid pasta. Maybe get your anti-pasta platter and just don't eat the bread, but eat all the beautiful meats and the cheeses. If you're at Mexican, maybe you go and ask for your Mexican frigitas without the tortilla and kind of make it like a naked bowl. Opt for the salads, the guacamoles, the salsas. Get the bowl, no rice. Go for that naked option. A bit like if you're, getting a gyros, you could ask for a naked gyros, where you got all the meat in the salad and you just get it in a container without the bread. For Thai, just go for those stir fries with all the meats and the vegetables. Instead of eating the rice, get extra greens. Go and get some kangkong. Go and get some extra Asian greens and feed up on those with all the meat. Avoid as much as you can the sweet and sours and the sugary sauces, but where you can't avoid sauces, just pull all the meat out. Eat lots of vegetables and enjoy. Burger, get the burger without the bun. There's a lot of places now doing, Betty Burgers does the Bugsy bun. Even Grill does a low-carb super bun. Ask for double meat, double egg. Get it wrapped in lettuce. Get extra greens, load it up with those low-carb toppings like cheese or extra bacon and lots of avocado and salad, and double the patty. Indian tandoori is great. So get lots of different tandoori curries with like butter chicken or tikka masala. Just don't get the rice. I had a client the other day. She went there. She ate the cauliflower. She said, I ate that green stuff you told me, which was the spinach and the panak paneer with the spinach and the cheese. And she said, I just didn't eat the rice and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Don't get the naan, the roti, the potatoes. But again, if you have a meal out once in a while and you want to eat them. Just reset and get back on track. Chicken shop, get the grilled chicken or the barbecue chicken. It's late tonight. I might have to do that on my way home. Go and get a coleslaw or some green beans or a Greek salad. Just don't get the pasta or the rice salad. Avoid anything crumbed and battered. And maybe what we're doing is we're getting the gyros in the gyros, in a pack. Just say, I don't want the bread. Just put all the salad and the meats and everything in a container. Go to Subway, get any Subway you want, but get it in a bowl. Double the meat so you get more protein. Add cheese, avocado, olives, all those low-carb things. Watch for sweet dressings. Get some mayonnaise. Get some low-sugar dressings. Get some lemon juice. Throw in avocado. Just avoid the breads and the wraps and the sweet sauces. So finally, we start to look at low-carb slips. And what are some trips if we, do find ourselves sort of back in that carb world, the glucose is going up, the weight's going up, and understanding what your carb threshold is. Now, I always say the 80-20 rule, and I've already mentioned this, is that it's impossible to avoid carbs forever. It's just about reducing frequency. You don't have to avoid them. Don't feel guilty. Just allow them on occasions when it's worthwhile. It's the frequency every day, whether it's the sugar carbs, whether it's the starchy carbs releasing sugar, the natural carbs like fruit and honey and milk releasing sugar, those everyday foods all the time, breakfast, lunch and dinner and snacks, that's where the problem lies. So if you lower that, go 80-20, then that 20% you can go and enjoy those foods you like and you'll see your glucose drop. It might spike when you eat those carbohydrates, but it will come back down again, and that's okay. Your weight will go up temporarily, but that's just fluid and then it'll come down and you'll still achieve your weight and your pre or type 2 diabetes goals of putting them into remission if you have the 80-20 rule. But what's interesting is because insulin resistance does create an imbalance in your ghrelin and leptin, so you can feel hungry and crave, is that sometimes when we eat carbohydrates, we get this more cravings for there's a true carb addiction that can happen for some people, from a dopamine in the brain to the insulin being high, and we're hungry all the time, or hangry as I call it. So what I just say is the next meal or the next day, you need a little bit more protein and a little bit more fat in your diet. Have some more nuts. Have a really big omelette with, some cheese and some avocado in there and some, some sliced tomato. Really feed up on some protein and it will stabilize things. So have that omelette, maybe have an Asian beef salad at lunch with a big steak sliced into it. And then you'll start to get back into your fat adapted stage, and you won't have that roller coaster of insulin and glucose, which the sugars go up and the insulin goes up and then they drop down, and then you're hungry and your body's running out of sugar, so it needs more fuel. When you're in ketosis, your body just feeds off fat, so you get this more stabilized sugar because it's not relying on that, so you don't crave as much and feel as hungry, and protein's filling. So, don't have to be perfect. 80-20 rule and reset with some protein. Again, some people have true carb addictions, and that really requires further assistance with a health coach that's versed in low carb, with your doctor, with your dietitian. Carb threshold is something, and we talked about how much carbohydrate, that a low carbohydrate diet might be 50 grams or less than 130 grams a day. Everyone's carb threshold is different. So if you want to include a little bit more carbohydrate in your diet, it's about measuring things to see how much you can get away with. So I had a client yesterday that came in and they were only having 50 carbs a day, but they wanted more carbohydrate. Their blood glucose was good, their weight was dropping down, and they actually felt no brain fog and felt quite energized. And they didn't get that afternoon slump where they used to feel so lethargic and so tired. And that's where they would be at their most vulnerable, where they'd grab the biscuit or the chocolate to sort of get them boosted again, and they were really hungry. So what I say to people is, if you've dropped your carbohydrates and you're losing weight, or your glucose is coming down, great, and you want a bit more fruit or you want a bit more bread in your diet, then what you have to do is you have to start adding a little bit and keep an eye on your glucose. Keep an eye on what your weight is and how's your brain feeling, how's your energy, how's your cravings. If you've managed to get your glucose down, and let's say it's gone from an 8 to a 6 millimole, and you're seeing that consistently over the days, over the weeks, and you go, I don't see 8s anymore, I see 6s, and I might have seen a 5.9. And then you go, right, well, I'd like to add a bit more carbohydrate, and you start adding a little bit more fruit in your diet because you've got fruit trees. And so you start adding an extra fruit 3 or 4 times a week, and you're still going great. And then before you know it, the Mandy tree got the better of you, and now you're eating fruit every day again. And suddenly you see that sugar's just spiked to maybe, an extra millimole up, and it's not come back down. Well, that's you going over your threshold. You're overusing your limits, and your body's not coping with that. So you can work out how much carbohydrate you can cope with. So that's why it's good. Go low, and then you can experiment. And maybe you can have 100 grams of carbohydrate a day. Maybe you can't. So it's about measuring what your health markers are that you're trying to improve. And if you see them improve, great. And then if you want to work out if you can have more carbohydrate, then you have to just measure your markers and work out what you can tolerate. And everyone is different. I get some people that really struggle, they're metabolically unwell, and they've really struggled for such a long time. They can't tolerate lots. And then I've got people who, have some insulin resistance, but it's been grabbed at 35 and their sugars are higher, but they can manage more carbs. So they get their carbs down, they reverse their issues, and then they can tolerate a bit more because they're younger and their metabolic sort of resistance isn't as bad. So everyone has a carb threshold, and you can certainly experiment with that. So today I hope that I've sort of taught you some things that you might be able to use in your clinical setting to teach your patients. Maybe I've taught you something that is useful for your own journey. Maybe low carb is very new to you, and so this was just a really good way of you understanding how it might help you or how it's going to help your patients. Knowledge is power, and learning more about this, which is what the Defeat Diabetes program does, is really the only way that you can learn the power of this I guess, way or lifestyle. So I've tried to give you some tools of how you can teach your patients about low carb, or maybe I've taught you a little bit more why low carb diets are helpful to lower glucose and improve insulin sensitivity, and actually help reduce our weight versus the eat less, more, move more model and overall lower chronic disease risk. I've hopefully taught you, explained to you what a carbohydrate is and what all the other macronutrients that we're eating in our diet, and how carbohydrates release glucose and how that puts pressure on our system. I've hopefully taught you about the macronutrient formula, which is really eat an animal with a healthy fat and an above ground veggies, chuck some berries in, and some dairy. Some pantry guides, what should we keep in our pantry, how to build low carb meals and really visualize how we can bring those together. Low carb swaps, how alcohol fits in this journey, eating out tips, and how we can still eat out, and how to reset if we do struggle with eating carbs and start to crave again or feel hungry, what do we need to do? So hopefully you found it useful. So I'd like to thank you for listening to me today, and hopefully I haven't gone over time. Certainly Defeat Diabetes is a really amazing platform, and for patients who are maybe really starting this journey, it really has everything in there that they need. So if you want more information and complimentary access to Defeat Diabetes, and some free resources and patient and GP resources, you can scan your code. You can visit defeatdiabetes.com.au, and you can reach out. And, it's something that I think is such a useful tool for patients. It's got everything in there that you really want for your patients or want for yourself, in fact, from recipes to education sessions. And I highly recommend it. So thank you so much for listening to me today. And I can see there are some questions popping up in the box. So I might hand back. You've probably all heard enough of my voice, and maybe we'll do some Q&A now if we've got some time.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we've got quite a few questions, and I apologize to the audience, but I might get you, Nicole, if you don't mind going through them relatively quickly rather than doing too much of a lengthy explanation. And so I'll just start with, in no particular order. So there was a question about this type of eating is quite expensive and high on animal protein, which is not great for the environment. So thinking about that.
Well, look, I think that one of the things I always say is that a low carbohydrate diet actually reduces hunger. So people over time actually feel less hungry, they snack less, they feel more satiated, they often naturally fast. So although ingredients like that may technically be expensive, you actually eat less overall anyway, and you can still do it on a budget. You can go and get some eggs, you can go and get some tinned fish. I probably won't go down the rabbit hole of the environment. I think that's probably another night, but I think you can certainly do low carb on a budget. I mean, an omelet's not super expensive. You can do some tinned fish and salad.
Sure. And then I'm going to just combine two questions here. So kind of the looking at saturated fats and looking at cardiovascular disease. So cardiologists really want to push LDL to less than 2, total cholesterol less than 4, really low triglycerides. And so the question is, how do you balance all the animal protein and full fat dairy with the potentially of higher lipids, especially in people with cardiovascular disease who are targeting very low LDL?
Yeah, look, great question. And there's a lot of information on Defeat Diabetes about how we look at, I guess, lipid profiles. And you do find on a low carb approach that you get a reduction in triglycerides, an increase in HDL, which technically can be reflective of that cholesterol being what we call fat and fluffy, or pattern A. But for the ease of today, because cholesterol is another whole rabbit hole, is that you can still do a very good Mediterranean style diet and minimize, I guess, the overproduction of your LDL. So if you're doing a lot more fish, so if I've got someone coming in and they're concerned about their cholesterol, we can eat plenty of fish. Eggs don't give you cholesterol, lots of avocado, nuts and seeds. You can certainly throw some tofu into the mix as well. You can get up and have a granola. If you want, you can go for reduced fat Greek yogurt as long as it's got no sugar. You can go and have a salad with smoked salmon and avocado. You can snack on some nuts in the afternoon. You can go and have a big salmon steak, some lean chicken, do a tofu stir fry in the evening with greens, add plenty of olive oil. You can have a lot of mono and polyunsaturated fats in a very Mediterranean style diet if you don't want to have those more saturated fats to keep your cardiologist happy. And again, I encourage you to go down and have a look at the information on Defeat Diabetes about cholesterol, lipid subfractions, and trigs and HDL and the LDL, learn a little bit more about it. But we can do it without lots of saturated fat. What I just said there is a very good lower saturated fat Mediterranean style diet that's still a low carb.
So the kind of following on from that, there's two questions. Is coconut oil a healthy fat, and do you recommend full cream milk over light milk? So I guess that's kind of looking at saturated fats again.
Yeah. I mean, coconut oil is a saturated fat. So I guess if we're going to go down the traditional method of keeping LDL down, then we might leave that out and we might go for more olive oil, which is a very stable sort of mono fat, and it will not oxidize with cooking. With full cream milk, there's seriously not a huge amount of difference between full fat and skim milk. So I think, use whatever you like in moderation. If again, you use a lot of milk, then surely maybe going a reduced fat option might be the way. But I always say there was no low fat cows, so why would we drink low fat milk?
So I've got a question here. So how do you incorporate this if you're in a family and you've got kids who are doing sports, so like teenagers or young people who need their carbs before their sports and on game days? So
Yeah.
is there a family-friendly way of doing this?
Well, you're talking to someone who has a 16 and an 18-year-old and a son that plays, football. So, this type of style of eating is for the metabolically, challenged people who are struggling with their prediabetes or type 2. If you've got kids that are healthy, they don't have any weight issues, they don't have, we're seeing kids with type 2 diabetes, with fatty liver, with obesity issues. So if you've got a really healthy kid that's got no metabolic problems, then give them the rice. Just don't give yourself the rice, and eat the same top. Eat the bolognese, you've got the zoodles. My son's got the pasta. In fact, my son alternates between training days and game days where he eats good quality carbohydrate, like whole grain pasta and long grain rice. And then on the non-training days, he'll eat low carb with us, because when you're metabolically fat adapted, you can switch between carb fuel or, sugar fuel or ketone fuel. So let your kids carb load with good quality carbs. They don't need sugary cereals, and they don't need white bread, and they don't need muesli bars. So, they can have the same top as you're eating, and they can have the carbs and you have a different bottom. So I think, some families will embrace and do some low carb meals together, and chicken kebabs with a salad. Everyone can eat that. But if someone wants the roast potato, they can. And I do find my son needs those carbohydrates on his training days, but he's metabolically well. He doesn't have any health issues and he's very active. However, he has type 2 diabetes in his family history. So when one day he stops all that exercise, he probably is going to need to be watching his carbohydrates more closely.
Mm-hmm. I also just wanted to ask about metformin. So metformin, insulin sensitizer, so thus less insulin, lower blood sugar. It doesn't do the ketosis, or the ketones, sorry, but kind of has a similar effect of potentially by lowering insulin. How does that fit in the low carbs picture?
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess I can answer that by, if you do a low carb program, most of the clients will come off their metformin, and therefore you don't need the drug to do the job. But yes, the drug is creating an improvement in our insulin sensitivity. You can overlap both of those methods, and most of the clients that I see, or even going into the Defeat Diabetes program, they are coming off their medication. So if that's your ultimate goal, but it's a bit like, we could take the metformin, and if it's doing the job for you, then you've got a drug managing your disease. But I think if you can do it with the diet, then you might not need that metformin down the track anyway. So they can both be used together. But I guess what we're trying to do here is lower carbohydrates, so you don't need drugs. A low carbohydrate diet will improve your insulin sensitivity.
Sure. So last question for the night. Just people with eating disorders, or who might have had kind of issues with food and food labeling as good and bad. And how does this kind of fit in? So a lot of the population struggle, with their relationship with food, and this strategy, I guess, doesn't look at the complex mental health associations with eating and also with reading kind of nutrition labels. So how would you kind of manage that?
Look, I think that a lot of people, and it depends on what eating disorder we're talking about, but I guess let's look at sort of binge eating. And you've got a lot of people that have been on so many diets for so long, and they're struggling with binging, and they're they do feel guilt through food. And going low carb is not about taking carbohydrates completely out and feeling guilt. In fact, so many people feel embraced, because one of the things we say to defeat diabetes on low carb programs is eat to satiety. Stop starving your body. Stop feeling guilty. Feed up when you're hungry. People are starving their bodies. They're trying to eat less calories. They feel guilty for everything. On a low carb approach, it is about feeding up your body. And what I say to people is feed up on your proteins, your healthy fats, your greens. Eat as much as you like. People are often surprised. What, eat as much as I like? Absolutely. They're so used to eating and restricting. So suddenly when you go on a low carb plan, you don't have to count calories. You don't actually have to restrict and starve yourself. So number one, we're taking away restriction, which is a big part of the dieting process. People are, you can feel really happy with your foods. And we're not eating carbohydrates, never. You can still have carbs, but what we want to do is let's get you metabolically feeling better. Let's get your glucose down. Let's get rid of those cravings. And then what we'll do is we'll work out how much carbohydrate you can tolerate in your diet. And, your body's going to tell us. So, I really think embracing a low carb approach is actually far less restrictive in the end, because people don't count calories. They don't have to fear that they've eaten too much. People always say to me, how much, Nicole? I say, eat to satiety. They find that so difficult to understand. And I say, trust me, you will not be hungry. So when you start to feel the embracement of no hunger, that cravings aren't driving you, that 1 minute you're binging on food that you shouldn't be, and the next minute you're not, you'll actually find the relationship with food is far better. And today I just focused on mainly carbohydrate, but we'll still go down and look at other nutrients in that food, in those labels. But binge eating is a massive problem, and people have a fear of calories and food, and low carb just does not do that. And again, you've got to be with a health professional that will individualize and navigate your journey. So going on Defeat Diabetes is going to give so many recipe ideas. They can eat a muffin still. They can make cake. They can eat pancakes. They can eat bread. They can go and make their own muesli bars. They can eat granola, and they can eat meat, chicken, fish, and eggs. So there's really nothing you can't eat. You've just got to make it with a different flour. So I actually find everyone that goes on their program and decides to go down this way actually does not feel restricted for the first time in their life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. That was very interesting. And yeah, I think we could probably keep on asking questions for a lot longer, but I better wrap it up there. So all the resources should be available. I think we're sending them out to attendees, and we'll also send out an evaluation survey. So would appreciate if people could fill that in as well. And thank you so much. You're very passionate and very kind of informed, and it's certainly kind of food for thought, but not necessarily carbs for thought. Okay. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having
That's
me.
all right. Thanks. Good night, Kat. Good night.